All right, family, let's talk about some basics, getting started with throwing on the wheel. Today we're just going to explore the centering parts of things because it really is the most important part of throwing. If your clay that you're working with is not 100% centered on your wheel, you're not going to end up with a good product at the end. So to get us started, making sure that our wheel is on, it's plugged in, all of that goodness. Couple of safety reminders. You want to, if you've got any loose clothes, you want to make sure that that's pulled back. A lot of times you'll find that potters, when they're throwing, will prefer to wear an apron just to keep some of the clay in check from being all over you. I would also highly recommend taking any rings off because they are going to catch with the clay and it is going to affect some things. So if you can throw barehanded, that's going to be in your favor. Some other things that we have here, I've got a nice large bucket of water. I've got selection of all my tools. And then as far as like first starting, I'm gonna use, well, my clay is a little bit extra. I would highly suggest starting out with about a pound of clay. So it's about a palm full, just like we used for our pinch pots. And you really want to take the time to wedge your ball of clay. I know that I've spoken a bunch about how air bubbles are not really the enemy for firing purposes. However, they do throw off the clay when you're trying to throw. So if you're hand building, air bubbles are not the biggest concern, but they are a concern when you're trying to throw. So make sure you take the time to wedge it really well and get all of those air bubbles out. You'll also notice that I have it roughly in a circle to begin with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to firmly attach this ball of clay to my wheel head. And I want to try and get it as centered as possible. Because again, the whole goal for this particular exercise is centering. So I'm going to get my aim and then smack it down really hard against the wheel head. Now, it's hard to tell, but I've got some lines in my wheel head to tell me roughly if I am centered or not. I'm really not. So I'm gonna just start to push it in the right direction. If it's really off center, you take it off and start again. But if it's close enough, you can kind of just shove it the way you want to. So again, we're focusing just on centering. So the end goal here is not actually to make anything. My end goal here is simply to practice centering and stretching it up and recentering and really making sure everything's aligned in all directions. So to get started, I'm going to get some water in my sponge and I'm going to turn my wheel on a bit. And I like to go over the bit where the clay meets the wheel head with my sponge and make sure it's really attached. I'm also going to squeeze some water on top. You're going to end up using a lot of water. We want your hands to glide over the surface of the clay. So if at any point you feel like your hands are sticking, we need to get some more water happening. And eventually you'll end up with a really gooey coat of clay on your hands. That's going to be perfect because that's going to help your hands glide like you want them to. So there's a lot of ways to center. You're going to have to kind of experiment and find the one that works best for you. I generally have my elbow locked against my hip or my side or my leg so that this hand is holding as straight and still as I can. And then I'm using this hand to help maneuver things. One common mistake people make when they're first starting on the wheel is they get to the pedal and they just like really ramp it, like full speed. You don't want to go full speed. If it goes too full speed, if it goes too fast, it gets harder and harder to control. So a nice medium is what you need. So if you look at my hands, you can see that they're generally doing this. Like obviously this is exaggeration, but I want to get the clay to a point where my hands are still and the clay is rotating below. So start to get that way, I'm going to, remember I'm bracing to keep myself still because I am the mountain. I want the clay to bend to me. And I'm starting to squeeze in on both sides to pull the clay up a bit. And anytime my hands start to stick, I'm gonna make sure I'm rehydrating. And then I'm going to slowly and gently bring this clay back down so that it's a nice centered ball. So we're getting a little better, getting a little closer. If you start to get goopy, like extra goops on your hands, you can just scrape them off into your side wall and clean them up later. And we want to bring this mound back down nice and low and even as we can get it. And again, because this whole first exercise is purely on centering, I've got this pretty centered. I'm going to stretch it back up again and see if I can recenter. So again, I'm pressing equally from the sides to stretch it up nice and tall. And then I'm going to start to bring it back down, again, aiming for a nice, rounded, centered, equal in all areas mound. So you notice as you start to push down from the top, it's going to gather in weird spots. And it might start to feel like it's twisting. So really make sure that that brace hand is nice and still so that we're filling in that section nicely. And if you're watching this in class together, if you're watching this from home, ideally when the first day that we're working on the wheel, I recommend that you spend the class just practicing centering like we're doing here. Because the better you can get at centering, the easier the later steps are going to be. Because it's all, the throwing on the wheel is really all based on gravity and momentum. And if you're not center, it's going to throw off the center of gravity and it's going to make your momentum weird, which then makes it very difficult to make the clay behave as you want it to. So I would really practice, spend an entire class period or an entire hour just stretching it back up and centering it back down. And each time you start to feel comfortable with an amount of clay, I would repeat that exercise. So if you start to throw and feel really comfortable with a pound of clay and you move up to 2 pounds, I would spend a day or a class period centering 2 pounds before trying to build. And then same with 5, and then wherever you go from there. Just to really get a sense of feeling the mass and the material of the clay that you're working with before you try to make it do as you want.